fantastic news for South Africa on Africa Day, of course. And no surprise there, given the fact that we hosted the FIFA 2010 Soccer World Cup, and of course we're now officially parts of the BRICS nation.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit more about that and where South Africa is headed, because even prior to this award, we know that South Africa is obviously deemed as the powerhouse of the continent.
Yes, it's certainly by far the strongest brand in Africa, and it's doing extremely well. The World Cup helped a lot, but the question mark really is whether or not it's been leveraged enough. And we were contrasting it with the Australian Olympics, where the Aussies really leveraged that to huge effect. I think it's been done well here, but it probably could have been done better.
That's quite fascinating. When you're talking about leveraging on these very significant events, what could have been done more? And is it too late to start capitalizing further on the fact that we did hold and have a successful event?
Well, it's never too late, and frankly, it's all relative. I think just that their whole infrastructure, the way that they promote the Australian brand, is a masterclass. They are extremely good at it. And South Africa could learn from that. And I think it's one of those things where it has become a governmental policy issue that you really need to develop your nation brand, to build the country and to build the individual brands within it.
So what is the next step then? Is it about marketing on international channels? Is it about ensuring that people have a lot more awareness about what South Africa could offer from a tourism perspective? Does it really have to do with the corporate scenario, or is it a combination of all factors?
Well, I think the reality is a lot is already happening. I mean, we're in partnership with Brand Africa. They are doing a lot. Here in South Africa, there's Brand South Africa, which is a government-sponsored organisation, and they appear to be extremely active. So I think the message has actually got across. I think the government is beginning to move. The real issue is, will it actually do the same kind of things that other countries have done? It's now a very competitive game, the nation branding issue. Singapore, Taiwan, Malaysia, they are all busily building their nation brands and their corporate brands, and South Africa needs to rise to that challenge.
It's quite fascinating because we are viewed as an emerging market, but yet we've got the growth scenario playing out very similar to what we see in some developing nations, or developed nations rather, and this is why many have been very skeptical as whether we do fit within the BRICS scenario going forward. And it seems that other South African, Southern African brands and other countries are doing very well with regards to the economy and in terms of economic growth as well. Are any countries catching up to South Africa at this point? And I know that Egypt came in second.
Well, within Africa, it's been another difficult year for the African continent, either from a governance point of view or from an unrest point of view. South Africa is the shining star, and the real question is, it will leap ahead of the rest, there's no doubt. South Africa is not really a developing country, it is a developed country, and it's just a question of whether it does it better than it has so far. It's getting better rather than not being very good to start with. And you know, if you look at the characteristics of South Africa expressed in its agricultural products, its companies and its people, it's in a very strong position.
With regards to your research methodology, what really encompasses what a company or what a country is doing right now, and whether it gets in first place or second place? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, basically what we're trying to do when we put an absolute value on it is we're effectively saying, what would someone pay to have the South African stamp on their product or brand? And we say, how much would they pay for that? And then we apply that to the revenue that they generate. So it's known as royalty relief. You say, oh, I would pay you a license fee. And we've worked out what we think the license fee would be for South Africa. We've applied that to the GDP, and that's how we arrive at a number of 149 billion, which is the value of the brand.
It's quite fascinating when we look at the overall perceptions of the African continent. We were deemed as a dark continent for many years, and now we keep being called the last economic frontier in a sense. Do you think the perceptions of Africa as a whole are starting to change extensively?
Absolutely. Well, there's another rush led by the Chinese. The Chinese are going in all over Africa to get resources, but also because they can see it's a great opportunity to develop. So I think the next 20 years will be a year where Africa as a whole, South Africa in particular, does very well.
I find it quite fascinating that Egypt came in second, in fact, and obviously this is prior to all the troubles that occurred at the beginning of the year. Could you also just elaborate in terms of what impact the revolution that we saw in Egypt at the beginning of the year? Will it be positive or negative, would you say?
It'll definitely be positive. I mean, it's a quiet revolution, although there was a bit of violence. It's basically a transition to a new form of governance, which will be better. And I'm sure they're already beginning to advertise the fact that it's a new direction.
With regards to the third place, we're seeing Nigeria coming in there. Also, vast economic growth. We know that Lagos and Abuja bursting at the seams because those cities are just not big enough to cope with the demand that we're seeing on the ground. With regards to South Africa keeping top spot going forward, do you think there's any chance that one of these countries could perhaps take the place next year?
No, I really don't think so. I mean, I suspect that South Africa is best placed and has got the best governmental program to power ahead, frankly.
Top African corporate brands. No surprise there that MTN comes up at top spot, but in fact, it's really also got to do with the South African scenario that is playing out. We know that MTN has got a massive footprint on the rest of the African continent as well. With regards to the telecom space, that obviously dominating the top positions, and then we see Standard Bank and Absa coming in second and third place. Again, no surprise there.
I think the interesting thing about MTN is it absolutely encapsulates that kind of entrepreneurial spirit which is South Africa. It's very direct, it gets out there and it builds itself. In some respects, you could say it is surprising that it's so big and powerful. It's just a very good job, very well done by the brand team there.
Standard Bank coming in second place, and of course we're chatting to the Standard Bank CIB CEO a little earlier, also talking about the fact that they teamed up with ICBC in China, giving them that competitive edge. So clearly, do you think it's also about having that foreign element? Well,
it's a very clever move. At one point Standard Bank was part of Standard Chartered. It was divested during the apartheid era. They're now growing abroad, and the greatest growth is in Asia. So teaming up with a Chinese bank was a brilliant notion.
Absa coming in third space, not really a big brand on the whole of the African continent, obviously very well known here. With regards to what we're going to be seeing going forward, do you find a lot of the corporate companies as well coming to the fore and saying we need to get that African footprint, we want to be well known on the rest of the African continent?
Well, absolutely. Walmart's trying to come in here, Bharti Airtel's trying to come in here. Many people are now trying to get their piece of the action. The interesting thing is that Barclays owns Absa. And my understanding is that they're going to be transitioning it from Absa to Barclays, which in some ways is a great sorrow because Absa is a great local brand.
Again, I allude to the fact that you were talking about the Chinese rush. We know we're seeing a lot of foreign interest. You mentioned Walmart. Is this really the trend and the precedent that will be set by a lot of these top brands, that they eventually do team up with those foreigners and those international counterparts?
I think you'll probably find both. I think you'll find foreigners coming in and buying them up. They may rebrand them or they may keep them because they're good. But I think you'll also see outbound. South African Breweries is now a global player. I think we'll see a lot more of that.
In terms of Africa doing more for their brands, I mean, clearly it is about marketing. It's about a lot of other things as well. What would the next step be for the rest of the African continent to change perceptions of risk and political inability to try and get elections at least going? Well,
they say that the CEO is the leading brand manager of any big corporation, and clearly the president is the brand manager of a nation. I think it needs to be led from the very top, and what you need is money, action, and development of programs that will allow local companies to grow strong brands that can go abroad, but also underpinning all that, strength of the South African brand.